actually did reach that understanding in 2015. But watching him in 2004 is very interesting because 2004 was the year that the decision was made. And this is also something very important to understand about our foreign policy. It's not that a president comes in and then we have a new foreign policy and then another president, we have a new foreign policy. These things are very deeply set courses. These wars in the Middle East go back 30 years. This war against Russia actually goes back to 1945 at the end of World War II, but in the current version goes back to 1991 and by plan to 1994 when Clinton laid out the NATO enlargement. And then Brzezinski spelled it out for the public in 1997, but it was decisions already taken. So we can watch Kissinger in 1994 explaining, yeah, Russia's weak, take advantage of them. This is the time to take advantage of them. This is what gets us into such unbelievable insecurity. We could be the safest people in the world in history. No one could conceivably attack us, and yet we're 90 seconds to midnight.
Do you have any expectation that will change?
I'm counting on President Trump to change this. I think his instinct is right. I think his sense is right. I think he doesn't like war. I really do. You know, he
doesn't.
He displayed that in the first term, and he said that repeatedly now. This is the best thing we have going for us. Now, in his first term, he hired a lot of very irresponsible people that like war or that like duplicity or that like the deep state or that like unaccountability, like John Bolton, one of my least favorites among all of these.
Fair.
And Trump hired them. So the question now is probably not his deep sense, which I think is absolutely right, but now his tactical sense inside the U.S. government. Please don't let the deep state continue on a path that it's been on, and don't let the normal hardliners, because Washington is filled with people who have been on the payroll of the military-industrial complex their whole careers. Don't let them dominate policy. And the incoming administration is such a mix right now. And we see that the clarity of those who want to control this, how hard they're being, how harshly they're being opposed, like Tulsi Gabbard, or let me say Bobby Kennedy, though his department is health, but he understands this peace side as well very clearly. These are the ones that they're fighting because we have been for, I'd say, again, 30 years at least, and arguably basically 80 years since the end of World War II on a particular jag, which at least Mitch McConnell does us the service of naming by its name, which is primacy. And if we continue on that course, Trump will fail and the United States will be gravely endangered. And if he reverses that course, he stands to be a great and historic president.
Because there's so much at stake, you sort of wonder what the people who oppose that kind of reform would do. I mean, the national security state has been eager to use violence abroad again and again and again, murdering people. As I said, trying to murder Putin. Would they, or are you concerned that they would be willing to use that domestically?
I think there's no doubt that they've used assassinations at home. I'm of the view that JFK was the first clear case of that at home. This is a long, long story, and some people roll their eyes at it, but I've spent much of my life reading, studying, examining this. I think it's quite arguable for Bobby Kennedy the same way, and I don't think that there have been scruples inside about keeping prerogatives. at the same time, the situation is better now in one regard. 30 years of failure. So it's not as if the course that we're on is giving us these great benefits. The United States needs to change course for our own security. We need to change course for our own finances. We're not in good shape in this country.
Yes.
When 75% or so of Americans repeatedly say America's on the wrong track, they're correct at that. And they say that now. That's the latest Gallup findings. And they're completely right. So this is not the exuberance, and I would say the hubris of 1991. And I was there then as economic specialist and an advisor, unpaid and informal, but an advisor to President Gorbachev and an advisor to President Yeltsin and an advisor to Ukraine's President Kuchma on how to stabilize their desperately destabilized economies and how to move to market systems. And the United States was not interested in peace. We had this hubris that history had ended, we had won, and now America would run the show. The difference today is that we're 33 years after the end of the Soviet Union. We tried the neocon approach for 30 years now. We have engaged in all of Netanyahu's wars. We went to war in Ukraine. Everything that was predicted has been proved wrong. The neocons failed time and again. They didn't remake Afghanistan. They didn't remake Iraq. They did not remake the Middle East. They did not call Putin's bluff and enter Ukraine with NATO. They did not enter Georgia with NATO. They completely misjudged how we would push the rest of the world into unity, as I mentioned with Zbig Brzezinski, saying Russia will never side with China on this. Well, of course, he got wrong the most fundamental diplomatic change of our age, the rise of China and the creation of a group that does not want U.S. hegemony, and a group that is increasingly integrated in production and military and security and diplomacy. So we are at a time where the failures are self-evident if people open their eyes, and the American people know it, in fact. So it's not even convincing the American people, oh, it's worse than you think. No, they know. They want their own problem solved.
Yeah.
How about jobs, some housing, reduce crime in my neighborhood, keep the inflation down? Could you keep the debt from destroying American public finances? They're not interested in Mitch McConnell's primacy continuing. He's an octogenarian. Go. Done. You're done. It's time for something different. So in this sense, it's really possible for this administration, this incoming administration, to change course, because it doesn't require a massive public education. It requires honesty. It requires seeing down the deep state internally. It requires making sure that the key appointments that want competence, honesty, and security for America actually get the job. And, of course, it requires President Trump following through on his profound main insight, which is that there is no reason for war with Russia. There's no reason for war with China. And I want him really to know there's no reason for war with Iran. None.
But every week, every day, Fox News tells me that there's some, assassination attempt by Iran. They're sending drones from their ships offshore over our country to scope it out for future attacks. I mean, Iran is presented in the U.S. media as the aggressor trying to kill Trump, for example.
I don't know if those Fox reporters have the chance to speak with the Iranian senior officials or
that's not allowed.
Middle East officials. I do. I do all the time. I am able to ask questions, to check facts, to understand circumstances. I speak to lots of people engaged all over the Middle East on these questions, and it's simply not true. So the first thing one should do, period, in this world is talk to the other side. And if Donald Trump has that, this would be the farthest reach, but if he has that impulse with Iran too, he will be perhaps amazed, perhaps gratified, but he would do a huge service for the American people, huge service for the American people.
My sense is that, a war with Iran feels inevitable. I'm obviously opposed to it, but tell us how you think that would go if it happens.
There's nothing inevitable till it happens.
Amen.
So
thank you.
This is extremely important. A war with Iran will be World War III. So that's the point. Iran is not alone, and it will not remain alone. And so if we go to war with Iran, we are expanding the war with Russia. With Russia, we are at a possibility of peace, but we're also at a possibility of nuclear war. They're both very close. And if we go to war with Iran, we make the nuclear war, all the more likely.
Do you think that the people pushing us toward war with Iran understand that?
No. I think that they're following a plan, clean break, 1996, and a plan, 1991, 7 wars in 5 years, that has been deep set and that has been Netanyahu's baby all the time. Netanyahu, I regard as one of the most delusional and dangerous people on the planet. And he has engaged the United States so far in 6 disastrous wars, and he's aiming to engage us in yet one more. But Netanyahu's track record is just about the worst of any person on the planet right now in terms of damage done. And we should be able to understand that. And we have a lot of rhetoric in this country standing up for Israel. We're not standing up for Israel. We are engaging in war on Israel's behalf all over the Middle East. That's a completely different thing. I believe in Israel's security alongside a state of Palestine, which I know completely to be possible and achievable and peaceful and ending this risk of World War III, and could have prevented the 1 million or so deaths that have come from Netanyahu's wars up until now. And the Arab states have been saying this repeatedly since 2002. It's called the Arab Peace Initiative. Anybody can look it up. They repeat it basically nonstop in the last 2 years. The Iranians want peace. I know that as well. And so the whole game is to make claims about the other side and to say if you talk to the other side, oh, you're a traitor. That's what they say about Tulsi Gabbard. She talked to Assad. Well, what about that? Isn't that amazing?
But I just to refer back to the core of it, I don't understand when Assad became our enemy and why should I go along with that?
It was almost a flip, because there were nice words said about him by Hillary Clinton one year and then the next year exactly the opposite. Because these are mind games that are played for reasons that are not said directly.
And that have no bearing on American national security or aren't motivated by a desire to protect the United States. There's nothing to do with that.
Of course not. Nothing that has happened in the Middle East has been for American national security. None of it. Not one of these wars. These have been Netanyahu's wars. Watch him cheerlead.
So why it's just amazing how few Americans, many Americans love their country and are willing to lay down their lives for it and have. But how few are willing to say what you've just said?
Because they're told repeatedly the opposite. And you can be told anything can be sold, even not that people believe it, by the way, but they don't hear the correct story anywhere in the mainstream. They hear things that don't quite make sense to them. And by the way, this is one of the points of Infowar. The public didn't believe the official narrative about JFK's assassination. The public didn't believe the official narrative about RFK's assassination. The public didn't believe the official narrative about COVID. The public didn't believe the official narrative about Iraq. The public doesn't believe these things, but it doesn't hear the coherent explanation from the New York Times or MSNBC or CNN or anybody else. No one actually tries to explain. And so what hangs out there is something completely unsatisfactory, but it doesn't have an alternative explanation. And if you don't have the clarity of the alternative, then this miserable, phony Infowar approach, it fills the space, and they're not interested in convincing us because we don't have any say in any of these issues. They're interested in doing what they want to do without being stopped. That's the difference.
When was the last time you appeared or wrote for a mainstream publication or television channel here?
It was the day that I was on Bloomberg and I said the U.S. blew up Nord Stream.
I remember that, and they cut you off,
and they cut me off, and then berated me for several minutes while I was watching on the screen, but cut off, and that was the last moment.
But the U.S. did blow up Nord Stream.
Pardon me?
You were telling the truth,
of course, and exactly who did it when is something that would be easy to find out in 5 minutes. So that's not even hard to find out.
But you haven't appeared on any,
not once, because. That's not quite true. You know, if it has nothing to do with foreign policy issues, it's just an economics question once in a while. But basically, the mainstream follows the security state line.
But so, I mean, and they're acting against their own interests. This is not flattery, but it's just true. Whenever we do an interview with you, it gets millions of views and people love it. And we make revenue off it. And it's like, it's good business to have you on. I happen to agree with you and think you're wise, but it's not like people don't want to hear what you're saying. Lots of people do. We've proven that.
People want to hear some explanations.
No, but you specifically, so you were a fixture on different channels, NBC, for example. And so when they ban you from those channels, they're hurting themselves because viewers want to watch you. Well, it's just, I know that because I have you on. So how exactly does that order go out, do you think? Do you know the mechanics of keeping you off? Like one day there's just a bulletin, no more Jeffrey Sachs, or how does that work?
I need to ask you because the phrasing, the official lines, kind of the stupidities and sillinesses on almost any story of the kind that we're talking about get repeated across the mainstream space very, very quickly. And not only on the U.S. side, but generally in the British media as well. And so there's certainly there's an official narrative, of course. So this is part of the story that senior White House briefing, Jake or somebody else briefs, and that becomes the meme. That becomes what you have to defend. You have to defend your continued access. You have to be good, loyal citizen of this. By the way, there are lots of contracts that go out with the military-industrial complex. This is a $1.5 trillion a year business, not a small business, by the way. It's real business. It's lots of think tanks. It's lots of academic centers. It's lots of people on hire. It's lots of contracts. It's lots of that all. You don't get any. I mean, I don't want any of that, but you don't get any of that if you're standing outside that. None of it. So people make decisions. I think one of the best lines of modern history is the line of Sinclair Lewis that you can't convince a person to believe something when their salary depends on believing the opposite.
Yes.
And that's a real thing. People have jobs. They just don't want to get out of line. They don't necessarily believe, but they don't want to get out of line. And it's very worrisome. And we thought that checks and balances of the U.S. government would be a stabilizer, and especially that we would have voices in Congress that would be able to ask real questions. And we have in the past. We had Frank Church. We had J. William Fulbright, who was not only brilliant and a critic of American foreign policy, was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Who do we have now? Well, we have Rand Paul, and we had Tulsi in Congress, but basically almost nobody now. They're scared, or they don't want to talk, or they're paid for by who knows, RSX or Northrop Grumman or General Dynamics or Boeing or somebody. So they don't even ask questions. This is the reality.
Jeffrey Sachs, thank you very much.
Great to be with you as always.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.